I've learned a very valuable lesson about picking my challenges. Never let your audience decide. Hello friends, my name is Volantis, and today's Nightmare challenge was picked by none other than all of you. I presented the potential games, and you picked Dead Space Remake. Then I presented the challenge options, and you said minimum kills. So here it is. Can I complete Dead Space while only killing the minimum enemies necessary? Figuring out the rules for this challenge was a muddled mess of indecision, but here are the two that I settled on. First and foremost, this run will be glitchless. There are out-of-bounds clips that bypass little bits of the game, but we'll talk about those later after the run is concluded. Secondly, this is a minimum kills run, not a minimum deaths run. So only enemies that die by a direct result of my actions will count as kills. If an enemy kills itself without me forcing it to do so, then it won't count against me. But I will do my best to prevent an enemy's suicide whenever possible. This rule has a big gray area, as you'll come to find out. What is considered a kill and what's considered enemy suicide can be debatable, but when we get to any parts where such an event occurs, we'll discuss it more in depth. Now, I don't want to say suicide a ton and potentially have this video get flagged, so I'll often refer to that as an ESD, which means enemy self-death. Anytime I say ESD, you know what I'm talking about. But otherwise, it's time to sack up and get started. The arrival into the nightmare that is the USG Ishimura starts as any normal playthrough would, by yeeting at Mach 5 past the bloodthirsty brigade in order to preserve Isaac's big blubbery dump truck yams. Once we acquire the cold steel plasma cutter, the challenge officially begins. But before we dive into our first dance with the undead, let's talk about the overall strategy of today's run. This challenge is all about, you guessed it, avoiding killing things. And what's the best way to do that? By simply running past them. Modern problems require modern solutions, or whatever the kids say. But, boys and girls, there is something better than simply running. By turning on the aim toggle and leaving sprint toggle off, you can sprint while aiming, increasing your maximum movement speed by about 13%. That's big helpful. Core technique number 2, leg amputation. By cutting off a necroturd's leg, they become severely handicapped, unable to move quickly or even use vents. A very effective way to reduce enemies to an unthreatening state while also not adding to the kill count. I use these two tricks during the entirety of the run to avoid conflict. So if I don't address a part you might have been wondering about, suck it up and trust that I was just doing this. Our first course of action is to replace the damaged tramcar blocking the tracks. Once you get that done, Kendra calls and then you're free to go. However, Kendra is in no mood to help preserve my aforementioned dump truck yams. She doesn't call until all the slashers here are dead. Sadly, there is no workaround for this. You have to kill them to progress. 10 minutes into the game and we have to add 6 kills to the counter. Yuck. Now over to tram maintenance. It was a given that I would suffer a few slurpy chomps from the ungodly amount of slashy boys here, but I was confident I could get in and out without a single necro death, although that's easier said than done. The game frequently autosaves, which is fine and all, except it also saves the locations of every enemy within a 10 light-year radius. So every time I die or reload a checkpoint, those undead douchebags will still be there, drooling at the thought of chomping off my meaty dumplings. Eventually, I was able to trail a lot of the slashers around the room, which gave me the space needed to get into the data board room without getting completely overrun and barricaded inside, as was the result just about every other time I tried. 8 stressful attempts of trying to retrieve the data board before eventual success, and with 0 kills. Nice. Returning to the Kellyan and then making my way toward medical is simple enough without killing anything, so we finished the first trip through the flight deck with 6 kills. Tracking down Cappy's rotting meat bag was very easy by comparison to all that bullshit. Only 2 fights in medical are required, the research lab and the morgue. A quarantine locks you in the lab with 9 slashers, which are not at all difficult thanks to actually being allowed to play the game as intended. Kinesis for the win, baby! The morgue holds the body of the captain and his first mate Infector. In order to minimize the kills here, we smoosh the bodies in the room before unleashing the beasts. With these 2 jabronis now dead, medical is all done. Chapter 3 was brutal. Worst part of the entire run. I would rather stick toothpicks under my toenails and kick a wall than do this section again. What made it so unbearable? The goddamned refueling station. I would start by delegging the single slasher at the start of the room and trailing it away, so I'd have enough time to kinesis the gondola into place and then get on without getting attacked. But once I rode it to the other side, 3 slashers would be there waiting to slice up my cake. One of those guys is also a spitter, so that adds an extra layer of annoyance to this whole debacle. You'd think I could just run by them, right?
Wrong!
Isaac's ass is big. but a slasher's hitbox is somehow even bigger. And 3 of them are more than enough to completely wall me off from exiting the gondola. Isaac can't be bothered to hike his double dummy thick jumbo fart balloons up over a crawling zombie. How embarrassing. After a few very frustrating tries, the game took the slightest sliver of pity on me and allowed me to slip by the legless heathens. I managed to grab the key card to the circuit box room, pulled the refueling lever from the safety of my new closet, then sprinted back to the gondola. The consequences of my actions were waiting for me back on the other side. Lieutenant Dan's double-wide carcass was enough to stop me dead in my tracks. Get out of the fucking way! I eventually accepted that this just wasn't working and opted for altering my strategy. I restarted this whole area and whipped out my wrinkliest brained idea to date. I blew off one of Dan's legs, slowly trailed him away, then I locked his ass in the crusty bathroom. Ha 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 ha, dick. It took a few more tries to successfully do the south refueling station again, but in this time I figured out a more adequate formula of amputation and stasis. I had to repeatedly stasis these 3 wieners from a distance, then blow off righty and middle boy's legs. This gave me just enough room to get off the gondola and plow through. I was able to grab the keycard again, activate the lever, then return to the north side. And with Dan still tied up in the shitter, I'm clear to move on. Navigating the rest of engineering wasn't nearly as bad. I had another quarantine in the decontamination room, which required 4 more kills. Then I reactivated the centrifuge, severed the head of a massive throbbing tentacle, and headed toward fuel storage. Okay, so remember what I was saying at the beginning about ESDs? Fuel storage was full of necros ready to just end it all for the cause. So there's this busted door, right? No big deal normally, but it's lethal, you see. On one side of the door, a pregnant. Beyond the door, a slasher, a spitter, and a swarm of swarmers. What I need to try and do is gather all the enemies here through the broken door and into the fuel storage room, then book it back through the door and toward the engine room, preferably without anything dying. That last part is impossible. I don't mean that it's difficult, it's virtually impossible. I could lead every enemy, swarmers included, through the door without it killing them by keeping it open with stasis. But they're so hungry for my juicy schmeat, they'll follow me back through the door at any cost and suffer a fatal smooshing. I mean, I did what I could to save them, but they clearly had a death wish. I fully believe that there is no way to save every necromorph here. I didn't kill any of these ones myself, nor did I really entice them to kill themselves, but it seemed completely unpreventable. So we'll add 11 ESDs to the counter, if you count each of the 8 swarmers as individual enemies. I genuinely would love to see if any of you can do this part without any of these enemies dying. If you can, post it and let me know. Anyway, onto the engine room. Thankfully, we actually have plenty of space to work with this time, so I was in and out in a single try. Once you clonk the battery into place, you have to clear out the room of crusty butt cakes before the engines are ready to reignite. The one thing to note about this fight is that before you plug in the battery, 4 necros are already inside the room. These 4 are not tracked by the game as needing to be killed before restarting the engines, meaning that I have to keep them alive. So the plan is simple. Remove their legs, both as a safety measure, but also as an identifier of who not to kill. Then obliterate everything else, start the engines, and leave. Fighting things as you normally would doesn't need a detailed analysis. I got the engines fired with those 4 special necro dicks still alive. Like I said, first try success. The next 3 chapters were a breath of fresh air, no pun intended, thanks largely to how handy the sprint aiming trick is. After being forced to choke down one large Yappuccino courtesy of Hammond, I head out to start fixing the asteroid defense system. But I'm stopped in my tracks by a mandatory one-on-one showdown with the brute. Unsurprisingly, it ended as you'd expect. Complete and utter annihilation. I rerouted power and mining admin and then dipped without killing anything. Sadly though, 2 slashers suffered self-inflicted deaths via gravitational electrocution. What a sentence. Over an electrical, a lurker will end itself on a gravity panel right as you round the corner. But like the caring, animal-loving altruist I am, I couldn't stand by and let this poor little doggy get zapped into the great beyond. Yes, I know they're human babies, not puppies, but I like the dog joke better. Faster than the speed of light, I stasised the lurker, ran past the gravity panels, froze the brute, rerouted power, juked the brute again, then was out the door without the little doggo succumbing to shock death. Well, sadly, a different lurker sacrificed itself in its place.
Well, that's a problem. But not my fault. I did everything I could. Also, why are you still here?
Well, anywho, getting to the ADS and recalibrating it went okay. No deaths, no mandatory kills, no problems to report. Medical Deck Part 2 was probably the easiest chunk of the whole run. With supreme aim sprinting skills, I avoided having to kill even a single Necro Boy. The increased speed meant I was even able to get past the Guardian and Diagnostics and make it to the chemical lab without any trouble. Dr. Mercer, the human embodiment of a skid mark, reveals himself by easily tricking Isaac's big dumb caveman brain into mistaking a hologram for a real human woman. AI is getting out of control. Mercer unleashes the beast, General Scrody McGrody Chody. He's back for another round of hide the zombie leg. On the short sprint back through Diagnostics, a group of swarmers try to suck out my soul, but with a handy stasis blast, they were too slow. Hightailing it from the security station all the way to Merkel's office and back could not have gone more smoothly. Even Colonel Chody and the second Guardian couldn't stop me. I ignored whatever abomination came out of that septic tank Marcus calls his mouth, and then froze Major Scrody and sent him away, and medical is all done. In order to get through the filler section that is hydroponics, we have to fatally stab 8 Weezers, then tackle the Leviathan. I'm not counting Weezers as enemies though, they're basically set pieces. After disposing of the first 2, we come to a long corridor full of exploders. Exploders only commit ESD if you allow them to get close to you, so we'll have to disarm them. Literally. With a couple shots to their puny left bicep, I can sever the explosive sack without killing them, removing their kamikaze attack from their arsenal. 2 more Weezers down before we cross over to the East Grow chamber. We tackle another mandatory brute, then eliminate Weezers 5 and 6. Normally what you'd do now is take the upper door toward air filtration, navigate through the giant fire tubes, neutralize a Weezer, then return to the Grow chamber through the back way and take out the last Weezer. We're gonna do things a little differently, partner. With a little finesse from the Pulse Rifle's proximity mines, we can open up that back way into air filtration early. This is important for this run because doing this skips the second drag tentacle and thus prevents another kill adding to the counter. So we kill the Wheezy Boy hiding in here, then the last one in air filtration. All finished. The showdown with Leviathan goes as it normally would. Since it's required, I can just light it up like your local crackhead's favorite back alley. One half of the game down with 32 kills so far. Mining deck time, baby! We have a quick brawl inside the elevator to kick this section off, but it's only 3 slashers, so nothing complicated. The trickiest part of this chapter is down in the mining subdeck. Each time you come here, you have to find a way to squeeze past some enemies in the limited space you're given. Right outside the mining control room is yet another pack of swarmers. I can't tell you how much I hate these little wank splats. I can't be reckless with these guys. I'll have to avoid them multiple times. So I hatched a plan. On this first trip, I froze them with stasis and hugged the wall as I ran by. Only 2 of them followed me around the corner and I locked them in the control room for now. I need to find the supervisor's rig, so now it's down to the processing subdeck. Once I clean up the enormous asteroid smelting room, a horde of disease goblins will appear to thank me for tidying up their playroom. As they advanced closer, I realized that their hugs of appreciation would be lethal, so I shifted my ass into overdrive. What's worse is that there are multiple exploders in this skirmish. What's even worse than that is I'm basically out of stasis. There are an assload of necrodorks, and as luck would have it, nothing here needs to die. You know what that means. I don't know if it was pure skill or a stroke of good luck, but in the middle of this cacophonous scramble, I somehow managed to disarm 3 exploders without stasis. I picked up the rig I came all the way down here for, and now I can leave.
Fuck me!
Okay, boys and girls. After hightailing it off the processing subdeck, it's down to the maintenance subdeck to find an SOS beacon, and maybe even my lost girlfriend too while we're at it. Despite the depressingly slow gondola ride and the mob of enemies on the return trip to the elevator, this portion went pretty well. There's one required fight here, defending the honor of my woman while she takes 6 billion years to unlock a door. 4 beta cuck slashers is all that it takes to show Nicole that I'm the Sigma-ist of males. I feel like I need a shower after saying that last part. Anyway, with the beacon in my possession, I can make my way back up to mining control, but not before getting locked inside the elevator for another fight. This time, 2 lurkers, 1 leaper, and a slasher met their untimely demise. Time for one last dance with a pack of swarmers. I don't really know how to explain what happened this time. I was gonna lock all the ones still crawling about inside the security room and that would be that, but they were already inside somehow. And the 2 that I locked in the control room earlier were gone. There was 1 swarmer outside in the hall, so I lured it into the security room, stasised everything, then sealed their fate. All I can say is, it seems like there's some funky necromagic going on in this area. Something to do with the security room and the mining control being in such close proximity, I guess. But whatever happened, they're out of the way now, and I killed none of them. So all that's left to do is launch the SOS beacon. I disarmed a few more exploders, destroyed the gravity tethers attached to the asteroid, planted the beacon, then returned to mining control. There was at least one exploder self-death on the way back while I was dodging all the fire, but it wasn't intentional, and I didn't even notice until I was reviewing the footage after the run was over. Oh well. Once again, I find myself back in mining control. Right on cue, Captain Chody burst from the vent, salivating at the thought of devouring my big Tonka truck ham clappers. This encounter is timed, luckily, so all I have to do is outlast Chody and his gang, which is easy to do with the stasis bombs, then pull the manual door release and haul ass back to the tram. Before we head back to the bridge, let's talk for a moment, yeah? How I chose to do chapters 8 and 9 is the entire reason I worded my kills versus enemy suicides rule the way that I did. As a refresher, if an enemy kills itself without me forcing it to do so, then it won't count against me. But I will do my best to prevent an enemy suicide whenever possible. Going into the battle inside the atrium, I had a thought that could have potentially forced me to redo the majority of the run. This is the first mandatory fight with exploders in it, but why does that matter? Well, I figured that if I got them to defeat themselves, then they wouldn't count as kills. But one step further, I'd have to get them to not just end themselves, but also every other necromorph that attacks. So my mindset as I played this chapter, as well as chapter 9, was to make sure exploders kill as many necessary enemies for me as possible. That way they wouldn't count as kills. However, as you may have figured out, this was a needless restriction to the run. Forcing an enemy self-death is the same as just killing it in my eyes. You know, the old jigsaw paradox. If they weren't counted as kills, I would have had to go back and redo at least half a dozen fights where I could have employed explosive canisters to force ESDs. It's a whole gray area and I don't want to do that, so I worded that rule the way that I did. Are you thoroughly confused yet? I'd be surprised if you weren't. Let's move on. I defeated the 11 Necros in the atrium purely by exploder kamikaze and self-inflicted firebomb, but like I just said, I'm still counting those as kills. I ducked the double guardians en route to the comms array and got it fixed while getting painful spitwads shot in my back. I tricked that dumbass divider into getting locked out of its own room and then quickly took down the Leviathan remnant in a satisfying 2 minutes. Unfortunately, I was too late. The ship we were trying to contact, the Valor, intercepted our escape pod with our necro worker inside. Whatever. Somehow a war vessel full of soldiers was overrun by a single slasher, and as a big middle finger to us, they crashed their ship right into ours.
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
The frustration is back in full force with our brief excursion to the Valor. Twitchers are the biggest bags of ass in the game. The supremely angering part of this chapter occurred inside the infirmary. This big bitch of a laser, which is normally very handy, made me want to run my real-life self underneath it. Between the two Twitchers here wanting to sacrifice themselves to it repeatedly, and Isaac being a complete fucking dumbass, this room took way longer than it had any right to. But annoying as it was, still wasn't enough to stop me. Whew. You know guys, I've worked up an appetite. You know what I could go for? A nice, big, steaming hot pile of necrodoodle casserole. I've got plenty of time to enjoy myself locked inside this quarantine. A smorgasbord of necros emerged to offer themselves up for my meal. 1 pregnant, an exploder, 2 lurkers, 2 twitchers, and the main course, a brute. As I said just a few minutes ago, I was still trying to make enemies dispose of themselves, so I lured each one over a gravity panel and froze them in place, forcing them to endure 1,000 lifetimes of suffering all at once. With my belly sufficiently full, I activate the lift inside the engine room to reach the Singularity Core. Don't worry, Hammond, I'll save you. I helplessly watch Hammond get turned to Manburger Helper, salvage a shiny piece of machinery, then make a dramatic and heroic escape from the Valor and back to the Ishimura. So as I've implied, pretty much the entire run, required fights are the easiest parts because I can just play the game as normal. Chapter 10 has 5 of them, and everything else can very easily be bypassed with the sprint aiming. Pregnants outside the 0G ball court, No problem. Lieutenant Chody attacks in the Nexus area, easy peasy. Dividers in the mess hall, didn't even see him. Double Guardians in the standard quarters, no trouble whatsoever. You get the point. Before freeing up the marker to send it down to cargo, we've got 3 quarantines to survive. Number 1 is in the deluxe quarters with just 3 slashers. Number 2 is in the executive quarters, 4 slashers and 1 infector. And lastly, the Nexus has 5 slashers, 1 leaper, and 1 exploder. I meet Dr. Porkchorker and hesitantly make a deal to return the marker to its home in exchange for access to an escape shuttle. I make my way down to the executive shuttle, duct tape that singularity core into place, then test fire the engines. The shuttle's explosive Taco Bell ass blast was loud enough to alert a certain immortal biomachine to my location. Sergeant Scrody McGrody Chody. I'm tired of this giant red prick. Let's send him to the fiery pits of the deepest circle of hell. So if it wasn't obvious, I have to eliminate Scrody once and for all, without killing anything else. That last part was really what I struggled with. In the chaos of being pursued by everything, I accidentally killed necromorphs while trying to cut off their legs, or killed some with the test fire. Only on attempt number 4 was I able to freeze Mr. Chodes behind the shuttle, then lure the rest of the squad away and leave him hotter than a half-fucked fox in a forest fire. As Phallus Mercer arrives to inspect the damage, he gets dragged away by the vicious, girthy appendage that tried to shatter my ankle earlier. Reluctant to suffer the same fate, I blast it to pieces and finish up this chapter. Now that Marcellus and the Chode are out of the picture, we're free to bring the marker up from cargo. Even though I was successful after only 6 attempts, the cargo bay ordeal was pure insanity. Without extra stasis and health packs, I'd have been massively boned over and over and over again. Once you prompt the system to bring up the marker, 3 slashers appear. These are the only 3 enemies in this entire sequence that have to die. A blessing and a curse. A blurse, if you will. Anyway, once those 3 are dead, you have to survive the absolute onslaught of 37 jillion necromorphs while the marker takes a goddamn eternity to move around the room. What's even worse, you have to spend about half your time in the dead center of it all getting your beehole pounded into oblivion by tentacles, while trying to raise the bridges for the marker and getting gangbanged by necro-chuds. These things are going to be my 13th reason. But after 6 increasingly stressful attempts, I withstood the abuse and made it out alive. Back to the flight lounge where the nightmare began for another brawl. 2 slashers and 3 twitchers. These prostate bandits tried to penetrate my south mouth, but had their arms and legs viciously broken by the clench of my mighty Asgardian cheeks. One last thing on our checklist, load up the marker. 3 lurkers and 3 leapers attack, and sadly they have to die for the objective to update and let me restore gravity. Boo! I go to meet Dr. Dongleponk on the shuttle, but I arrive just in time to see the spirit of the Ishimura evict his soul from his body. I can assume that if you've watched the video this far, you already know the story of the game by now. Kendra betrayed us, Nicole is alive, we steal the shuttle back, then Nicole and I take the marker down to the planet. Chapter 12 is packed full of necromorphs. The first quarantine inside the supply depot is, as you'd expect, required to progress. 5 slashers, 3 lurkers, 1 leaper, and a pregnant. Chaotic, but not difficult. Right after that is a double guardian doorway. And for the first time in the entire game, we have to kill these 2. I can stasis them and run between them, but those fat bastards are too close for the door to close, so I can't continue on. So with surgical precision, I killed them both without killing any of their pod children. But once I re-emerge into this room after reactivating the tether controls, I'm viciously assaulted by another band of merry bitches. 2 slashers, a leaper, a lurker, 3 exploders, and 1 last brute. Another wildly chaotic fight, but I did survive. But I forgot to check if I could have just ignored everything and moved the marker without engaging in a brawl, so I reset. But to no one's surprise, no, I can't move the marker yet until everything dies. So I did the entire fight again. Add 8 more kills to the counter. The next room is kind enough to not require any kills. The marker moves painfully slow, but I still had an easy time avoiding being attacked. The final stop before the end, the excavation site. This was fairly tricky. You have to blast 3 tendrils across the area and move the marker, but nothing here has to die. So that means trailing a dozen necros around the Cheeto dust-covered walkways and clinging to life. As I have done the entire run, I blasted legs to slow down as many necromorphs as possible. disarmed exploders to prevent accidental deaths, and used sprint aiming to slip by tight spaces. A brilliant strategy to avoid kills.
Sometimes my genius it's almost frightening.
All personnel, evacuate.
Oh my god!
I forgot that loading the marker on its pedestal kills everything. Fuck. Okay, I'm not counting this against me. This is completely unavoidable. I don't care. Argue with a wall. One last fight to end the game, the Gargantuan Hive Mind. The boss fight itself is very simple, very easy with how many times I've beaten it by now, but in the middle of it all are a few waves of normal necromorphs. I wondered if Hive Mind would still attack with its minions out and about, but being the benevolent king it is, it stood back and let its little ones deal with me. They attack in waves, more or less. I killed 5 enemies before Hive Mind decided enough was enough and just resumed the fight. 3 Necros were still alive, but with how much space Hive Mind's attacks take up, they were unfortunately destined to meet their end at the hands of their glorious leader. I didn't force these 3 deaths, so I won't count them. But now we can finish up this brawl as usual. Blast apart its chesticles, avoid the projectile diarrhea of green death, awkwardly shoot one last ball upside down, then make a break for the shuttle and leap into orbit as the planet gets brutalized by its own gravitational pull. Alright, let's look over the totals, shall we? Across the entire game, all the required fights alone racked up a mandatory kill count of 119. If we add in the 15 that died by accidental ESD and the 3 from the Hive Mind assist, that's 18 more, resulting in 137. I'm only counting the 119, but I'm including the others just for clarity's sake. Now, even though I only killed what was absolutely required through glitchless means, I still don't think 119 sounds impressive at all. I mean, if you saw how many necromorphs I ran by without killing, you might think differently, but still. But through the use of magic, and some thoroughly researched glitches, we can reduce the number of kills significantly. The experts over at the Dead Space Remake Speedrunning Discord have compiled a list of viable out-of-bounds clips to bypass portions of the game. A lot of these clips skip some otherwise required fights. I was practicing these myself and successfully nailed a lot of the easy ones, but some were too hard or tedious for me and I just wasn't enjoying it, so I chose not to use them for the run. You'd also need all of them to work to even bother using them in a full playthrough anyway. Just so you know, I'm gonna say the words skip and quarantine a lot when explaining these tricks. You've been warned. Anyway, the first skip utilizes a core speedrunning trick, the box clip. Simply put, you pull one of these kinesis boxes toward Isaac's dome, let go of aim at just the right time, and it will push Isaac briefly out of reality and into a different area. Usually it's to a floor below the one you're on, but sometimes it's to push you through a wall into a different room. For skip number 1, what's called the shock pad skip, position yourself against the wall here at the start of the hallway leading toward diagnostics. Use the box to clip Isaac out of the hallway and straight into the shock pad room, or in my case, the room just before it. This skips the fight in the research lab, cutting 9 off the total kill count. The next 3 glitches don't skip any mandatory fights, but they do skip areas where I had accidental ESDs. First is to clip out of bounds in the hangar to end up in the engine room. This one is very tricky. It's a long and very precise out of bounds flight, but if successful, it ends up skipping the enemies I dealt with between fuel storage and the entrance to the engine room. So it would knock off 11 ESDs. Next, after defeating the brute in Chapter 4 and activating the elevators, kinesis a small box underneath Isaac to propel him over the barrier of this guardrail. With another particular out-of-bounds clip, we can end up inside mining admin without the game spawning the 2 slashers that ended themselves on the gravity panels. Lastly, right outside of mining admin, box clip yourself through the wall and you'll end up in the back room of electrical systems. Fair warning, I could not get this one to work for me. I kept ending up above the ceiling of electrical systems no matter what I tried. I played on PS5, and I think the room might load in for this glitch a bit more optimally on PC, but I can't say for sure. But anyway, this one prevents the lurker that electrocuted itself from spawning, knocking off the 14th ESD. None of the required fights between here and Chapter 7 are skipped in the speedrun, except for the hydroponics drag tentacle, which I already did. At the start of Chapter 7, slowly approach the elevator controls until it prompts you to start it, but not so far that the door closes. Activate them, then sprint aim back out before the door closes. Kinesis this box behind Isaac, then use it to push him down the elevator shaft into the mining subdeck. This shatters Isaac's ankles, but otherwise skips the fight inside the elevator on the way down, reducing the count by 3 more. Next up is the fight where you defend Nicole. Using what's called the beacon skip will avoid even having to travel here, let alone fight the slashers in this room. You do another box clip in the hallway after picking up Dallas's rig, and if done just right, you'll land in the room with the SOS beacon. 4 more kills knocked off the total. Immediately after that skip, return to Nicole's room and wiggle yourself off the ledge to the floor below. From the bottom of this room, you can box clip out of bounds, then perform another very precise flight from here that lands you back in the mining control room. This will skip having to deal with those annoying swarmers, but more importantly, it will skip the mandatory second fight inside the elevator, saving another 4 kills. The exploder that died by ESD in Chapter 7 likely could have been saved with some top tier stasis, but like I said earlier, I didn't even notice it happened. Not that I count it against me anyway. But if you count it, I've got good news for you. There's a way to skip it. Inside the mining control room, use a small box to push yourself up onto the asteroid display, then use a kinesis box to clip yourself out and straight into the mining bay. But fair warning, if you do that clip, you'll also have to perform one of those pesky out of bounds flights, this time from outside the ship and back into the control room. This flight is necessary with that box clip since you skipped plugging in the battery that activates the lift. But if you do these skips, it knocks off the 15th ESD and prevents any other accidental deaths by skipping the fire hazards between the mining bay lift and the mining control room. The atrium fight in Chapter 8 can actually be skipped in 2 ways. The first uses another box clip. Inside the room between cryogenics and the tram platform, the one with all these servers in it, use the kinesis box to force yourself through the wall at the northeast corner and onto the small ledge out of bounds. Carefully move yourself to the right to the edge, then sprint back and left to fall into the comms array room. Successfully landing here skips the 11 enemies inside the atrium. Hell yeah. For the second method, we need to set up a skip for everyone's favorite fight, Necrodoodle Casserole. Or the Valor's cargo bay if you want to be literal. First, you'll need to bring another kinesis box with you into the mining control room in Chapter 7. Trigger the quarantine at the end of the chapter, then quickly use the box to clip yourself outside and back onto the lift without activating the manual door release. What this will do is keep the game in a quarantine state. This means that because we didn't end that particular quarantine, another one won't start. But make sure not to die or load a save file until you pass the cargo bay in the Valor. Doing so resets the game's quarantine status, and therefore the skip will not work. But since we're in an unresolved quarantine state, you'll be able to enter and pass through the atrium without triggering the quarantine there as well. Enemies will still spawn in, but you don't have to fight any of them now. How cool is that? The same thing happens if you manage to hold on to that quarantine state all the way into the Valor's cargo bay. Again, enemies will appear, but you're free to move on through without killing any of the 7 you normally would. Chapter 10 is where our fun runs out though. The enemies that spawn for the deluxe quarters quarantine still show up, but once you leave the area, the game will trigger the quarantine to end anyway, thus removing the unresolved state. The executive quarters quarantine will then just play out as normal. Oh well. But you don't even have to mess with that quarantine nonsense in Chapter 10, because an out-of-bounds skip right at the start is so good that it skips 90% of the chapter. Starting an out-of-bounds flight in the comms array, if done correctly, will land you at the shuttle hangar at the end of the chapter, skipping the 3 enemies in the deluxe quarters, 5 in the executive quarters, and 7 in the central nexus. Damn. Large skips like this usually result in a soft block due to the game's strict objective system. But because the objective at the start and end of this chapter are actually the exact same one, you can just skip right to the end. Chapter 12 also has a large skip in it. This one is insanely precise. By manipulating a kinesis box in just the right way at the start of the level, you can get Isaac on top of the building that's adjacent to the store. But that's not enough. You've got to use the same box clipping technique from other skips, but this time to launch Isaac into the stratosphere and around the backside of the level. Use the box to then push yourself up this rock formation and fall back down at the excavation site, conveniently with no necromorphs ready to chop you up. Do one last box clip to get you in the room with the tether controls, activate them, then bam, all done. Performing this will skip a whopping 20 enemies, 10 in the supply depot and 10 at the transfer junction. Plus all the ones the marker kills if you feel like counting those. So if you were to perform all the glitches available to skip necessary fights that don't also softlock the game, you cut out more than half the required kills, taking you from 119 to an impressive 46. 49 if you include the 3 that Hivemind killed. Most of these box clips are fairly simple once you get the feel for it, but I do not have the patience for those out-of-bounds flights. If you do, feel free to try a true minimum kills run with glitches yourself and let me know how it goes. For more in-depth information on the skips, I'll link the speedrunning document and the speedruns from Rampancy and Sharkhead87 that I studied in the description below. So technically speaking, yes, I beat Dead Space while only killing the minimum enemies necessary, if you play the game as intended. I hope you found this whole experience as interesting as I did. I'll admit, I nearly quit the challenge because of how frustrating Chapter 3 was, but I asked you what you all wanted to see, so I was committed to see it through to the end. By the time I reached the last couple chapters, I was enjoying it much more. For the difficulty rating, I think this one has squeaked out a 6.5 out of 10. A tad bit harder than any of my 6 out of 10 challenges, but not quite as difficult as the one 7 out of 10, the detonator only run in Dead Space 2. What did you think of this challenge? Do you think it's more impressive to do this run glitchless or while using out-of-bounds glitches? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel to see new challenges when they release. Subscribing is completely free. But that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.